Hello and welcome to Talk of the Bay for today, Tuesday, October 21st. I'm your host, George Cadman, and on today's program, I am joined by Molly Salans, a psychotherapist, author, and Family Constellation facilitator based in Santa Cruz, California. We're going to be talking about her debut novel, A Break in the Fog. For more than 30 years, Molly Salans has guided people through the landscapes of grief, love, and transformation, blending psychology, spirituality, and creative expression. She's currently completing her first poetry collection, Prayer Requests, which explores how compassion and beauty can rise from the heart of loss. Through her constellation circles and community gatherings, Molly helps people uncover the hidden love that lies beneath pain and conflict. Drawing from many wisdom traditions, her work honors the power of story, ceremony, and deep listening. She has been deeply involved in Santa Cruz's creative and spiritual communities for many years, and she reminds us that compassion is not just a feeling, it's a way forward for healing ourselves and our world. Hello, Molly.
Hello. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on Talk of the Bay. Let's start with your novel, A Break in the Fog. Can you share with us a brief description of the book? Avoiding spoilers, obviously.
Well, this is a psychological thriller about a dangerous cult and a tumultuous family, and it's very loosely based on my own experiences in a cult decades ago. It's really about 95% fiction. In the family, the father is a Holocaust survivor. He has severe PTSD, and he ends up denying his Judaism. And he has two children, Wendy and Clara, who grow up in San Francisco, California during the 60s. And Wendy becomes a drug addict, and Clara joins a cult. And their mother does end up becoming addicted to drugs and to alcohol.
You say that the book is partly based on your own experiences in a cult. What was that cult? How long were you a part of it? How did you break free from it? And how much of the book is your story? Because this is based partially on your experience.
Right. So the cult was called A Theater of All Possibilities in San Francisco. I joined it in 1978, and I was there for 7 years. I can name the cult now because the two founders of it have now died, although the cult does live on the East Coast under a different name. How I was in there for 7 years, and your questions were...
Just how, so you were in the cult for 7 years. You say it was called A Theater of All Possibilities. It's still in existence, but the founders are dead.
Yes.
Okay. So how did you realize you were in a cult? What were the things that brought your attention to it? You said you were in it for 7 years. And after you became aware that this wasn't maybe healthy, how did you break free?
So, me and everybody else in the cult were so very brainwashed that I had no idea I was actually in one. And the way I left, I was actually kicked out for negative behavior, which was defined as me asking way too many questions. So there was something within my beingness that knew that this wasn't right for me or for my baby daughter, who was only... when she left, she was 4.5 when I finally left. And honestly, it wasn't until my daughter was 18 that I understood I had been in a cult, even though I had been having nightmares. My ex-husband had also been in the cult. We became friends after we divorced, and we raised our daughter together once we were both out of the cult. And we were both living in Massachusetts at the time, and we were driving our daughter to college in New York. And on the way home, I asked him about, quote, it was called a school, and I asked him about the school we were in. And that's when he told me it was actually a cult. So for 14 years after I left, I had no idea it had been a cult. But once he described it to me, it all made so much sense to me. And by then I was pretty much free from it.
So how much of your novel, A Break in the Fog, is based upon your experiences in that cult, those 7 years in the cult that you said was called the Theater of All Possibilities?
The cult, the general foundation and the things that happened in the cult in my book are real. So the mind control, the way the facilitators I'll use the word I and me, but this was true for just about everybody in the cult. There was a way, let me just back up. At the time that I joined, I was very depressed. I was suicidal depressed. I didn't know it was called depression at the time because mental illness was not a known thing at the time. It was actually hidden because it meant you went into a mental hospital if you were depressed. So I was very depressed, and this, the leaders of this group, the Damien character in the book, was very seductive.
And Damien in the book, A Break in the Fog, is one of the leaders of the cult, correct?
Yes. So in this case, in the cult that I was in, it was a husband and wife, Sharon and Alex Horn, and the Damien character was their right-hand man. So he was the one that lured people into the cult. He was very charismatic, very handsome, very seductive, and he lured me into joining in the way that Clara is lured into the cult in the book. Although with Clara it was a restaurant, with me it was an actual theater. So if you want to know that story, I'd be happy to tell that to you. It's different in the way that Clara was lured in.
So in the book, Damien is a charismatic, attractive, handsome character who ends up in sexual relationships with many of the women in the cult, right?
Yes.
Was this true of the person who, in your experience?
Apparently it was.
Character?
So I learned this information once I left from various people who had left the cult. But apparently the Damien figure did sleep around with a lot of people, as did Sharon's husband, Alex. Apparently whoever, it was really, when I think about this now, the Damien character would sleep with somebody who Alex had recently slept with. It was like the women were passed around. I know of 2 women in particular that had happened to, and while I wasn't in touch with them, they were, I can't say I had any good friends in the cult, but I shared an apartment with them, and we shared a nursery. We opened up our home to take kids in, and with one of them I shared the nursery with. So I learned these things after I left. Thank God I personally did not get involved with that.
So you didn't really break free from the cult because you didn't realize until 14 years after you had left the group that it was even a cult.
That's right. So, but once I left, I did seek therapy for a while because I was more depressed when I left than when I had gone in. And I had a daughter at that point in time, so I knew I had to be so much better for her. And it was actually the birth of my daughter that made me understand what love really was, and what, for lack of better word, what God was. Because the cult was all about God, and it made, like Clara in the book, it made absolutely no sense to me until I had my daughter.
So how did Clara and how did you fall under the spell of a cult and be drawn in the first place? You kind of started to talk about mind control, about your vulnerability. You were depressed, you had anxiety. Perhaps this had gone undiagnosed.
Completely.
So what were the things? What was the, what drew you in? The vulnerability,
I'll tell you,
it sounds like.
Right.
How do they identify? How do you think they identify those people that are vulnerable? And then what kind of tactics do they use to draw them in?
So at that time, it was young people for sure. I had just graduated college. I was lost, confused, living back at home. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted to be in my life. At that time, I do remember having a very, very strong desire to marry and have children. And I was absolutely, so belief systems, really deep belief systems are very important here. So very deep within me, I fully believed that if I married, I would be saved. I know that sounds really corny. And
what year was this roughly?
1978.
Okay. I mean, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
More sense.
Yeah. Made more sense. And the whole counterculture of San Francisco, which I had grown in the thick of, was scaring the living bejeebies out of me. I could go, that's a whole nother tangent to go into. But so my friend and I were in downtown San Francisco, and these two pregnant women, now to see pregnant women was not the norm at that time. Some women were getting pregnant, of course, but they were love babies. But these women were actually married, and they were pregnant, and they were dancing around us and acting really crazy. And it took us right out of our normal experience. It was really fun.
So that was one of the tactics, was to kind of take you off guard or get you involved in something fun and exciting and different. Caught your attention.
Yes. And they said, we have tickets to a play. And at that time, the tickets were like maybe $40 each. I mean, a huge expense.
In the 78,
yes.
That'd be a lot of money.
And I said, we'll call the box office and come if we feel like it. And they said, oh, no, we handpick our audience. At which point my friend, who had more common
So making you feel special.
Yes.
That's another thing.
That's exactly it. My friend felt very special because she had more common sense than me. And she just pulled out her checkbook and wrote out a check for $80. She said, we're going, Molly. This is going to be really fun.
Well, was it fun?
No. It was, I'm a critic, right? I'm an English lit major. Very critical. And I was falling asleep, and I said to my friend, this is the worst play I've ever seen. So at the end of it, we're leaving, and the woman who stopped me said, who stopped us on the street said, where are you going? And I said, we're leaving. And then this guy, not Damien, somebody else, this really gorgeous guy came up. And he said, I hear you're leaving. I said, yeah, it's the most boring play I've ever seen. I was not mincing my truth.
So lesson to cult, if you draw people in with plays, make sure they're well written and good acting.
Right. And beware of gorgeous people who don't wear wedding rings and they're married. So he said, we have a discussion of the play afterwards, and all the actors are going to be there, and we really want real feedback. You are going to be so valuable to us.
So he drew you in.
He flattered
made you feel
me.
special.
Yes, again. And in this meeting, there were I'm straight, right? I'm straight female, always have been. So there were the most gorgeous guys in this circle. None of them were wearing wedding rings, and the Damien character was talking about community and the ache in your heart and how many of you feel this. And for years in my journal, I'd been writing, there's this ache in my heart. There's this ache in my heart. It hurts so much. And he said, the ache hurts so much you just want to die. And
so appealing to people's pain and sense of being perhaps lost or confused or suffering.
And who wasn't lost in San Francisco at that time? I've since learned that it was a cult city. You know, every other person was trying to draw somebody in. So I was hooked. You know, it felt like a lot of money, but I had it in my bank account, just enough, drew it all out, and came to the first month. Because I thought...
You had to pay how much per month to be involved in this organization, which you said again was called the Theater of All Possibilities, that you've now identified as a cult.
Right. It was $200 a month, I think, back in 78.
Money in the 70s.
Oh my God, it was so much money. And this is just for the first month. Just try it. You know, it's an experiment. If your heart's telling you to do this, do it. You know, speaking to that sense of adventure. And why not?
And now in the book, again, it's called A Break in the Fog. The main character, Clara, she gets drawn into a cult as well. That's one of the primary focuses of the book. And that cult in the book is not Theater of All Possibilities. No. It's the ancient side of ideas. And they have a restaurant called the Ancient Side of Eating, which is the way they entice potential cult members. Can you talk about that a little bit? How it paralleled your experience in real life?
So at the time I was writing this book, Sharon was still alive, and I was told by lawyers and other people who had left the cult.
And Sharon, again, was one of the leaders of the cult you were involved
Yes.
in. Okay.
So I was told to disguise it in such a way that unless somebody knew my name, they would not be able to recognize.
Because she could have, sued you for
sued
slander?
you.
Or
Oh,
something?
they have sued. They have sued.
They had quite a bit of money for such things?
You had, what, 100 people paying $200 a month in cash?
In the 70s. I'm sure that went up over the years.
They were able to buy homes in the Hampsteads in Long Island. They did this all through cash. Sharon's own son sued her.
Wow.
And they started to sue people who were leaving the cult, calling it a cult. They went after people. And one woman who lived in New York, she was connected to one of the strongest lawyers in the city. She just happened to know him. And when the cult realized he was after them, they dropped her case. They go after people. So even after their death, they go after people.
Let's talk in a minute about the money, because that's a hallmark of cults, that they try to take their members' money. Frequently, they try to get all of it.
Yes.
But I want to go back to being drawn in the first place. So we've got the ancient side of eating, which was the restaurant in the book. And you're saying, in your experience, it was a theater that you got drawn into and flattered. Oh, you can help us to improve our playwriting. And our,
that's right. I wish the audience could see your face as you're talking. Yes, that's right.
So in the book, the Clara and some of the others who get drawn into the ASI cult,
right?
They go to this restaurant, but it's more than a restaurant, because it's this kind of familial environment where people are welcomed. I mean, picture walking into a church or something where people come up to you, welcome, welcome, we love you, and embrace you.
Right.
It was more than just a restaurant. It was a way of trying to bring people into the fold.
That's right.
And it through being, behavior, but also through the food.
Right.
You describe the food, all the amazing tastes and sensations and the experience that people have.
Yes.
In this restaurant.
Right.
So kind of an ingenious way to draw people in.
Yes.
Particularly at that time.
Right.
When the book is set in the 70s.
Right.
When, natural foods and community, and this, not to say it's not always a popular thing, but there's been different times in our culture and our history where that's been a real draw for people.
Right.
I think we're experiencing some of that today.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes.
But anyway, can you talk a little bit about that?
Back then, I mean, there were so many communes growing up, and natural food and going back to the farm was a phenomena. So I kept asking myself when I was writing, this book went through so many different renditions, and I thought, what if I have no restaurant experience, but I certainly love to cook and I love good food. Mm-hmm. So I started to write scenes about what if this was a restaurant, and what would it look like if it were. Mm-hmm. And then I came up with what happens if you're seduced by really good food. And what happens if you're really, really lonely. Your mother's dead, your sister's a drug addict, you've just broken up with your boyfriend, you've just graduated.
Because you caught him cheating.
Yes.
You walked in on him cheating.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, spoiler.
That's a really good scene, too. However, so Clara has lost everything, and now she has to be home with her highly conservative, really intelligent cardiologist father.
Who's a survivor of the Holocaust and has bottled up all of his feelings around it.
Absolutely.
And hates anything smacking of spirituality.
Right.
Hates religion, but spirituality as well is just a no.
Right. Anything non-conventional. Yeah. So Clara wants to be a modern dance. She's an incredible dancer. She's been doing ballet. She discovers modern dance, and her father, Joe, just smashes it to pieces. No, you're going to be a secretary in my office. So that's more or less the opening scenes. And Clara is just had it. Everything is taken from her. Her dance, her boyfriend, her schooling. And she has to be at home with these constraints. She can't stand it.
She has to sneak out to go to the dance studio to teach classes.
That's
and
right.
Do it behind her father's back.
Right.
And then she gets lured into the cult.
Well, she's very, very depressed. And one of my editors said, don't do this. But I had her at the Golden Gate Bridge wanting to jump.
I remember that, yeah.
And the editor said, that's too corny. I said, I'm keeping it in.
I mean, how many people have had that experience? The Golden Gate Bridge is for
classic for it.
Kind of obvious reasons of attraction to folks that are considering ending their lives. So you talk about the natural food, the back to the land, and it makes me think of back to basics, which is kind of very enticing. It's a simple thing, and not to say it's bad, but it can be used by the wrong people. And I think we're seeing it used right now with the Trump administration. Make America great again. Going back to this fantasy of a time when everything was so simple. Of course, when you take it apart, you realize it's racist, homophobic, misogynistic, and all this stuff. But that is an attraction for some people who feel overwhelmed by modern society, who feel overwhelmed by chaos in the world, by violence in the world, etc. And they find this kind of thing appealing. So...
Yes, so we can go. I'm reluctant to talk about Trump because I don't want to get into the anger thing, which I feel a lot, and I know a lot of people do. But if you look at Trump as one of the most brilliant cult leaders in this country, who has really gotten so many people to believe, and here we go back into belief systems. Oh, I'm finally going to be able to afford my housing, my food, my kids are going to be safe, because he spoke so simply, and he spoke to the anger that was rising up in people, because as Biden was leaving office, food prices were going up. But we forget about the pandemic. We forget about the presidents before Biden. And actually, the presidents have nothing to do with the rise of food. So I don't know too much about this, but I don't want to get into it too much. But
of course, the irony is that Trump's actually made prices go up, and the tariffs have been a huge problem economically. And they're taking away Medicaid and all these other social safety nets, cutting SNAP and all this other stuff. So it really hasn't left those ordinary folks that are struggling economically in any better position. Far worse, actually. So
but what it has done, what he did, was he got a ton of vulnerable, hurting, aching people to look to the outside. Trump is going to do this for me because I can't do it myself. And that is a huge trait of a cult leader. Follow me.
I alone can do this.
I have the answers. Yeah. And there's a charismatic appeal, and that's what the Damien character was like for me. We have the answers. We have community. You're so lonely. Can you imagine being with a group of people who are struggling with loneliness and struggling with the same questions you are? Come be part of our...
And then they also make you feel like you're in. You got into the in group.
That's right.
Because you have this knowledge and this expertise and this and that, and they kind of stroke your ego. But talk about how they also kind of, in the cult in the book, and I'm guessing in your own experience, would kind of put you on a pedestal one day, but then bash you down another to try to keep you under their boot.
So in the first year, I could do no wrong. Has everybody seen what Molly just wrote? Could you repeat that, Molly, to the group? That was so brilliant what you just said. You have the right attitude. We'll hope you'll stay for another month, because after a year, you'll have the privilege of recruiting people, and you're going to be brilliant at it. And then for the first year, it was like that continuously. And then after the first year, it was like, we were cooking for these people. We were cleaning their houses. We were building things for them. Oh my God, you left a few crumbs on the floor. That's not what God would want. Your teacher is going to be very disappointed to see the filth you've left. This filth represents the filth in your heart and the way you view your teacher. You better change that negativity.
In the book, they will marry women. They'll handpick a husband for a woman. And once she's been encouraged to have as many kids as possible, if she's then deemed to be negative or whatever, not living up to the ideals of the cult, she could actually be kicked out, and her kids could be taken away from her and given to other people.
That's right.
Did that happen in real life?
That happened in the cult. It was crazy how many mothers were kicked out, and the children were passed from home to home. And we were on retreat. There was an all-women's meeting. My daughter was 2, maybe she was 3. And in each women's meeting, a woman was the target. And I am ashamed to say that I was part of the negative influence on a couple of women, really putting them down, going with the group mentality. So this time it was my turn. We were all sleep deprived. It was 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, and all of the women, Lorraine, who was Sharon's right-hand woman, looked at me and she said, Molly, we're really, really ashamed of you. You're one of the worst mothers we've ever seen. And from 10 or 11 at night until about 6 in the morning, I was completely demolished as a mother. I was exhausted, and Sarah's been crying the whole time. Well, of course she was. I wasn't spending any time with her, and the atmosphere was horrible for children. And at the end of that night, I actually agreed. Sharon said, Lorraine is going to fly Sarah back to Boston. She's going to find an apartment next to Michael, Sarah's father, because we were divorced at the time. And she's going to check in on Michael to make sure he's a good parent. And if he's not a good parent, Lorraine will just take Sarah. Now, for those of you who have children, you can imagine. So that next morning, Sharon calls me into her office and she says, we're going to call Michael to tell him that Lorraine's on her way home with Sarah. Now, one reason why I divorced Michael was because at that time he was a very angry guy. I was scared of his anger. And when he got going, you could hear him from 2 rooms away. So Sharon gets on the phone with Michael, and you could hear him swearing, miles down the road. You effing B, C-U-N-T, So finally she said, here's Molly. And when I got to the phone, he said, okay, we're divorced. When you drop Sarah off, there's never a bruise on her. She cries when she leaves you. When I drop Sarah off to you, she throws her arms out to you. You're a great mom to her. And if anybody on that plane is carrying Sarah but you, I'll have the police waiting. And he said, let me talk to Sharon and tell her that. So in this way...
So Michael had left the cult?
Michael left.
Uh-huh.
And so we had to divorce because he left.
Because you couldn't be married to him if he wasn't in the cult.
Well, I would be leaking energy, leaking information. We had to keep it inner. But I saw Michael because we had a baby and I wasn't going to have anything to do with that. So they wanted to have me drop Sarah off at somebody else's house. But I said no to that. And so we snuck it around. Nobody ever knew that we were seeing each other. But you and
Michael were seeing each other against the cult's wishes.
That's right, because it didn't make any sense.
He's the father of your daughter.
Of course. And he had every right to see her, and there was no sane reason for him not to. He was an angry guy, but he wasn't abusive to her. I was just scared of his anger. So when he did that, that was his first step to getting me out of the cult. He was very worried about the 2 of us, both Sarah and I.
How old was Sarah at the
Sarah,
time?
I think she was 3.
Wow.
And then about a year and a half later, he says he doesn't remember doing this, but I will never forget it. He was what we would call in Yiddish quite a mensch at the time. And when I finally left, he took a sigh of relief. It was really huge to see his relief.
So, but other folks within the cult had their children removed from their care? They did,
constantly. It was constant. It was this person was leaving and this person took on the kids. This person left and that person took on 6 children.
They left because they were kicked out.
They were kicked out as terrible.
They were kicked out but not allowed to take their children with them.
No.
The children were absorbed
No,
into the
because
cult.
the fathers would still stay in the cult, or there were women in the cult who were willing to take the children. Again, a great Yiddish word. It was meshugana. It was crazy making. Absolutely. And years later, I ended up talking to a woman who was in and out of it, and her children were moved around, and she kind of laughed it off. So I think she may have gone a little bit crazy from it all.
Wow.
Yeah, she.
I want to remind listeners you're listening to Talk of the Bay here at KSQD 90.7 FM and 89.5 and 89.7 in Prunedale, and online at ksqd.org. I'm your host, George Cadman, and I've been speaking with Molly Salans. She's the author. She's a psychotherapist and local author who we're speaking about her debut novel, a psychological thriller, A Break in the Fog, about a family in turmoil and a dangerous cult. Her book explores how someone can fall under the spell of a cult and how family, love, creativity, and compassion can pull them back out. We're going to get to that in a moment. So I want to ask you we already talked about some of the things that draws a person into a cult or controlling system or relationship. So we talked about vulnerability, so mental health, undiagnosed or untreated mental health, conditions like depression or anxiety, vulnerability during times of loss or transition.
Yes.
So perhaps you're going through a divorce or your mother passed away, for example. Insecurity or self-doubt that makes a person look outside themselves for direction, a powerful longing to belong to a group.
Huge.
A charismatic authority that offers certainty and simple answers, and isolation. Once you're in the cult, this is, I imagine, a way to, well, I suppose it could be used to get you in the first place if they corner you, but once you're in the cult, kind of isolating you.
Much more.
You talked about flattering people, making them feel special, making them feel like they have they're in the in group, they have something to offer that's unique, which they very well may, but it's kind of a tactic to bring people in.
Yes.
So is there anything we're missing here in terms of what draws people in and then what keeps them in the cult?
Right. So I think the longing to belong, and if you ever experienced in elementary school, during any of your schooling, being on an outcast, being bullied, not being in the popular group, or feeling like you were different and being really, really, really badly put down for that, when you meet a group of people who find your gifts, this is like heaven. This is something you've longed for, and there isn't the discretion of, it's the discretion is more like, well, these people are nothing like the people who bullied me. So there is this facade that is so appealing to someone who is so desperate to belong to a group, to have that recognition. So those two things are really paramount. And if you feel like you've been abused by your family in any way, shape, or form, to find initially a group of people who are an authority, who speak to you, to your heart, to your own vulnerability, as if they really get where you are. Mm-hmm. And it's all a facade. It's brilliant acting, and it's horrible.
In the book, A Break in the Fog, you talk about things. You don't explicitly say it, but as a reader, I was gleaning things that were happening within the cult that Clara was in that were kind of keeping her there. For example, they had her working all the time.
All the time.
She wasn't really eating.
Right.
She was drinking a lot of coffee to keep her energy up.
Right.
They eventually have her in a situation where she's giving all of the money that she earns to the cult, and they tell her initially that it's going to be good for her because all her expenses will be covered,
right,
and any money that's left over will be hers to keep. Well, it turns out she's always in the red.
Right.
She's always behind. She's always in debt to the cult. Did this happen in the cult you were involved in?
Not to that extent, but you had to come up with $200 a month in cash. And
in the 70s.
In the 70s. And the people who did not do it, who were in the red, some got physically beaten up. Some were thrown out, so the mothers were thrown out and lost their children. So the punishments were horrendous. And I think the terms of coming back was you had to pay double or something to get back in. And for whatever reasons, which I can understand, we were all so brainwashed, thinking, they used to say to us, well, you're not going to die physically if you leave, but you have a fingerful of spiritual knowledge. And if you don't have the full range of knowledge that we have, you're going to die a spiritual death when you leave.
So fear, that was another tactic.
Fear was a huge tactic, yes.
I'm looking at an overview of some psychological and emotional factors that keep people involved in cults, and some of them we've already talked about. But breaking down an individual's sense of self and instilling new beliefs using such techniques as sleep deprivation,
Yes.
punishment, and a constant cycle of guilt and shame.
Yes.
You kind of addressed that just there.
Yes.
A desire to belong, and this is something you also brought up that happened to you and happens in the book.
Right.
An initial love bombing and validation
Absolutely.
to draw you in,
Right.
that creates this strong desire to stay connected to the group, especially if you feel disconnected elsewhere, as Clara does in the book, disconnected from her father, who's kind of an authoritarian figure,
Right.
and who's trying to prevent her from following her passion, which is dance.
Right.
Ironically, she ends up being disconnected from dance within the cult. Right. At first, they tell her she can dance all she wants, and then find out that she has to give it up to find her true self.
To find her true self.
Yeah,
Right.
to be
Right.
pure.
Right.
Fear and manipulation, leaders using fear of the outside world,
Right.
a group's punishment for leaving. You've kind of
Yes.
talked about how people were punished for leaving because their kids could be taken away,
kids
or
could
they
be
would lose their friends. You
Yes.
mentioned one of the things that drew you back to the cult when we talked privately, you were telling me, was that you had friendships.
I
within the
thought
cult.
I did. I thought I had friendships, and my life was such that I had nothing when I first left the cult. I had nothing. So it was pretty scary to be on my own at 24 or 25 or whenever it was I first left the cult, 28, 29. Yeah. But,
So, again, I think of, even though it's not the same thing, the Make America Great Again movement is the exact same thing.
Right.
But I want to mention that I picked up a book recently called The Cult of Trump, which is by an author named Stephen Hassan, who himself was in a cult. Hassan. Stephen Hassan, who he's a mental health professional and forensics expert that's been helping people leave destructive cults since 1976, and he
Right.
himself was deprogrammed from the Moon cult.
Moonies. Yeah.
Anyway, he has a website that has a lot of resources on understanding cults, and I was looking them over today. He's got some different models that talk about constructive and healthy versus destructive and unhealthy, and how you can identify for yourself, and looking at individuals and leaders and organizations, whether that's a healthy thing or not. So I just wanted to let folks know about him, and his website, which is let's see here. Not sure.
I know Steve.
freedomofmind.com.
Yes,
his website, freedomofmind.com.
I used to know Stephen, and there was a time we were actually very briefly working together. He's on the East Coast, and he has a ton of experience in debriefing people, and he's written many books. And I also here on the West Coast in Santa Cruz can help people debrief from cults if you feel like you're in an abusive relationship with one person, or in a group of, because any group can turn into a cult. After I left the cult, I went into a writing group, and I felt like the writing teacher was creating a cult. So I left immediately because I already knew even though I didn't know I was in a cult beforehand, I knew what the behaviors were of abuse.
So here's some questions that he suggests on his website, freedomofmind.com, to ask yourself before joining any group. Who is the leader? What are their background and qualifications? Do they have a criminal record, a legacy of allegations against them, or a history of misconduct? Do they have addictions to sex, alcohol, media, etc.? Do they have emotional outbursts? Do they physically abuse followers? Do they financially exploit followers?
Right.
So these are some of the questions that he suggests asking yourself before joining any group. And I couldn't help, when reading through that, to think of Trump. I mean, he checks most of those boxes.
Yes.
Do you have thoughts on that?
Oh, so there's no question in my mind that Trump is a cult leader, because just because of his charisma and how he worked on the anger and the vulnerability of most of the people here in this country. I'm going to take care of you. The prices are going to go down for the food. You're going to be able to take care of your children. And there have been so many people in this country that have been so demarginalized and poor and struggling and not heard and not understood. And finally, there was this leader, who was, and many, many men, I have to say, were feeling really dissed out of their families. And finally, here's this charismatic male figure who's rich, who's made it, who's run businesses, who's been on television.
A lot of that's kind of fictional, though, in terms of his success, how he claims that he came up from nothing and all this stuff, which we find out.
None of it.
Simple digging in below the surface slightly reveals that to be untrue. I can't help but think that of patriarchy, in the book, I realize there's women in leadership roles. However, everything is directed toward male satisfaction and control.
Right.
And if we're looking at, MAGA, for example, the tromping on women's rights, the tromping on anyone's rights really who aren't white, male, heterosexual, cisgender, etc., citizen, not an immigrant. There's this very patriarchal masculine quality, quote unquote masculine quality, the negative aspects of masculinity.
I know.
In this situation. What are your thoughts on that?
It's devastatingly brilliant what he's done, because he's really been able to pull this off. And I think it's the money he's accumulated before he ran. I think he appealed to a lot of white men who are very rich and who are really sick of, quote, the women's rights and, wanting them back at the house, back as a wife, back as subservient. And he just found a lot of men who were building this base up. And I wonder now, there are still Trump supporters, but his base is more of what he is. And if he were not to be president, more of the base would come forward like him, so it's... You
mean that if Trump were to be no longer in power for whatever reason, that there'd be some J.D. Vance or some other figure to step, Stephen Miller, some other...
Scary. Right. So there's a whole base behind him that his ego is being fed by. So in a way, Trump is a cult leader, but he's also part of this MAGA cult that is feeding his ego. You're doing a great job. I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes, but they're all in cahoots together. So he's not alone in this.
Yeah.
It's very, very scary. And for me, I believe he's doing everything in front of us. I mean, what he's doing with the immigrants is just so god awful. There's the deportations in Florida, right on the Keys. Oh my God!
All over.
It's all over the place. So
going into cities like Chicago and Portland,
and San Francisco might be next. Yeah.
Oh God, you mentioned his grift and his benefiting financially from his position in office, and it made me think of some of the other hallmarks of a cult and questions to ask yourself before joining a group on this website, freedomofmind.com. And one of the things they say is there real financial accountability and transparency?
Right.
Of course, we know that doesn't exist
right.
really in this administration. And they also ask if you're discouraged from asking questions
right.
and questioning the leader, or to
right.
questioning the movement. What structural checks and balances exist within the organization? We can see they're trying to get rid of those left
right.
and right.
Right.
Is there an independent ethics committee to challenge and change policies within
Not
the group?
anymore.
Are there abuses or injustices? What structure exists to correct them? Is there a code of silence against unethical behavior of the leaders? I think we can all identify this within the MAGA movement. I do want to open up the phone lines now because we have 15 minutes left in the program. This is Talk of the Bay. I'm speaking with Molly Salans about cults, about her own experience in a cult, and about her debut novel, A Break in the Fog. If you have a question or a comment for my guest, Molly Salans, you can call in now at 831-900-5773, or if you have a comment on anything we've been talking about generally, 831-900-5773, if you'd like to join the conversation here on Talk of the Bay. So I want to get back to some of the question. Oh, go ahead.
Can you tell the listeners where to get the book?
Oh, please share with them.
So you can go to abreakinthefog.com. You'll see all about the book there. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can email me directly at abreakinthefog@breakinthefog.com, inquiring about the book, and I'd be happy to let you know how to pay for it, how much it will cost, and I can send it to you directly with a signed copy, and that would be my joy to do.
Nice. And there's also Bookshop Santa Cruz.
Bookshop Santa Cruz has it, and if you call Two Birds in Capitola and request it, they will have the book ready for you within a few days.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So for listeners that are tuning in late, and I realize you already talked a little bit about this, but tell me the motivation behind authoring this book. And was this just to share some of your own story and experiences? Was it to help others? What was your motivation?
It took me 13 years to write this book, and probably another 5 to get it going. There was just, because I'm a psychotherapist in private practice, and because I was helping so many people out of abusive relationships. And by the way, if you find yourself in a hurtful relationship or in a cult situation, please reach out to me. You can also reach out to me at healingswithmolly.com. That's another website I have. But reach out to me, because I'll be able to help you through that. But there were so many people, and actually I had a client who was coming out of that very cult, and she was asking me for help, which was really, so I was starting to get the
cult
message.
You were involved in?
Yes.
Wow.
I was starting to get the message that I needed to start writing about this, and I needed to start writing about it pretty seriously. There was something bubbling up in me. I had already written a book called Storytelling with Children in Crisis, and it was time for me to write this. And I started to write it as a true story, but then I got the message from people leaving the cult, better to put it into a novel form. And I'd never written a novel before, but there was a calling deep inside of me to get the story out. And I think at first it was to help other people, but then I realized I needed to come to terms myself with, what was this? How did I get involved? What drew me to this? Because Sarah was 18 in 1998, and I started
Your daughter?
Yes, and I started to write this maybe 10 years later. Well, 13 years, I don't know, maybe that was 14 years ago now. But at some point in time, I was really struggling with, I have to understand what happened to me. And if I understand what happened to me and put it into a novel form, explore it through a novel, I'll have more width and breadth and depth to explore it from than my own experiences. And that in itself will start to help other people. And as I began to read about cults and read more about World War II, because I knew it had to have something to do with that, and also my own family background, I wanted to explore more of that. What was it like to grow up Jewish, not Jewish? We were not a religious family, but we had a lot of Jewish culture, but we celebrated Christmas and Easter and Hanukkah and all of it all together all the time. And it was very confusing for me. And I was becoming more and more interested in spirituality, and where did religion fall into that, and what was religion anyway. So I had all of these questions that I wanted to explore that finally made it into this novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've talked about how you said that we have a deep human need for belonging. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm sure someone could take issue with that, but we're social animals, and I think
Yes.
you're right about that. How can that need be exploited to lead an individual into a controlling and manipulative relationship or group? And how can we protect ourselves and others from falling prey to a group like this? In other words, how can we satisfy this need to belong in a healthy way that leads us toward a healthy love connection, a healthy attachment to others?
Right. Very deep question. I turn to the understanding of compassion. It's always an inside job to be able to identify within ourselves those places that are desperate for belonging, or those places of vulnerability, some of the hardest places to be still with, which is where meditation comes in. But to begin to bring compassion, self-compassion to those places of, oh, I'm so lonely. Where do I belong in this world? And the compassion says, yes, of course you're lonely. Loneliness is okay to have. Can you begin to experience that loneliness and begin to work with it? And it goes into a place of grief, and it can go into a place of art. Maybe I'll draw this out. Maybe I'll write it out. Maybe I'll call a friend. Maybe I'll find a song or create a song or bang on the piano or my guitar to find out what this feeling is all about. So our feelings are here to create with, to be with, and to understand directly where self-compassion can actually begin to heal those places.
So self-compassion, creativity, exploring some of your feelings, reaching out to a trusted friend. These are some of the ways that we can...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Essentially heal so we don't wind up falling prey to this kind of thing. So what if what if we're involved in a group that's making us uneasy and we're questioning whether we're falling prey to a controlling person or group, or we see that someone we love, we think we're concerned they're being taken in by a controlling person, group, or leader? How can we awaken ourselves and others from mind control? How can we? You already talked about how we could perhaps approach it a little bit ourselves by having some compassion for ourselves, but there's got to be questions. I've already identified some of the hallmarks of a cult, but what if somebody is feeling uneasy about themselves? And then a separate question: how would we try to help someone or break them free if we think they're involved in something like this?
So our feelings give us cues that goes into our intuition. You're feeling uneasy inside yourself about a group of people you're with. Then do you have the courage to take some time alone to do some breathing right into that uneasy feeling? Is it in your gut? Is it in your heart? Is it in your head? What is that feeling trying to tell you? Again, can you journal it out? Can you take some paints and start to paint it forward? Can you take an instrument if you're a musician and start to strum it, to really first explore that within yourself and find the message? It's time to leave. No, it's too hard to leave. Well, then there's incremental ways to keep leaving. The more you can go inside yourself and know what that feeling is teaching you, the more integrity, intuition you're going to be able to follow. Your example can actually help somebody else leave. At the same time, and I know this has happened to me too, and perhaps to you as well, or other people listening, when you find that there's somebody you really care about that's either in a one-person cult, which would be an abusive relationship, or in a group, the best thing you can do is find one other person or two other people and pull that person out and tell them over and over again what you love about them, what you miss about them. So you're sort of debriefing that person from what the group is
almost an
telling
intervention,
them.
But not outright, not
It's
saying
not,
this group is bad, you should get away from it. But perhaps trying to draw them a little bit more toward people who genuinely care about them.
Yes, to show them, because when I was in the cult, when I got in, of course, I felt unloved. And while I was in it, I felt unloved. And if somebody had pulled me aside and said, maybe if they had said you're the most lovable, I wouldn't have believed them. But I miss you. We don't have lunch anymore. Would you come out with me? Just very slowly to draw me out. So it's actually the act of love and the act of compassion where you're tuning into where that person is. How much can they tolerate from you? How much will they come toward you, incrementally even? And
you keep emphasizing incrementally. So what you're wanting to do is not bash this person over the head or tell them they're behaving badly or kind of admonish them. What you want to do is remind them, hey, I'm here and I miss you. I love you and I love these things about you and I'd like to have a relationship.
Right.
Okay.
And in an outright intervention, then there are people who are using tough love. I hate the fact that you haven't talked to me, and other people who say, I miss you so much. And then videos are shown of the cult you're just being pulled out of. So in an outright intervention, it's a little bit different.
Okay.
But to pull out a friend, it is incremental love, and you have to, if you are reading yourself and your own intuition, then you're able to take a step back and not project that onto the person, but really read that person and what's the little tidbits that will pull them forward.
Okay. We do have a caller. I hope you're calling to be on Talk of the Bay, caller. Hello. You're on the air with George Cadman and Molly Salans.
Yes, I have an ex-mother-in-law that was involved with what I classify as a cult. She was a devout Catholic, and she'd go to church 5-6 days a week. And she never tried to actually get me to go to church except on midnight mass on Christmas. And I always refused the offer. And my friend goes, how do you not go to midnight mass? And I go, I don't want to go. And so there's all different levels of cults, and I think we get familiar, but we have to recognize, like you're saying, what is this that I'm moving towards? So congratulations on your book. So
you're saying you're saying that a cult is a spectrum. It could be cult-like or a full-blown cult, but it's on a spectrum.
Except for cults like Jim Jones or
right, that would be at the far extreme of one end of the spectrum, But then there's other organizations or groups that have cult-like, aspects, and maybe not a full-blown cult where they're taking all your money and telling you can't talk to your family or whatever, but they still have cult-like, qualities.
Yes, I started surfing at 12 years old, and I had a stepfather that he said, "You're a bum, you're a surfer." But the thing about being in that group is that we were all individuals surfing.
Very important. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it didn't take joining into the group. It just took you surfboard and you. And,
yes.
Well, thanks for your call. Appreciate it. Appreciate your call.
Thank you.
Did you have a response? Or
no, I think when you can feel your individuality in a group, you're in the right group. And you can leave and go. You're in a surfing group. You don't show up for 2 weeks. Nobody's badgering you unless they miss you. Hey, you're finally back. But it's not this guilt-ridden. You're a bad person for not coming. Yeah.
We just have a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure I remind listeners that you can get Molly Salans' book either at Bookshop Santa Cruz or at Two Birds Books in Capitola. If you go to Two Birds Books, you'll likely have to make a request for the book. It sounds like Bookshop Santa Cruz has it in stock. And her website is, for the book, if you would like to purchase the book through her website, is abreakinthefog.com. And she also has another website that is where she offers some of her healing, which is
healingswithmolly.com.
Great. Yes. And again, the book is called A Break in the Fog, and is a psychological thriller, which is partly reflecting her own experience in a cult. And we only have 1 minute left, and I want to make sure that if there's something we didn't talk about that you want to address, that you have an opportunity to do it now.
Well, I just wanted to say that if you are in a book club and you use my book, I will come to your book club for free, and I'll tease out the fact from fiction for you, and it would be a joy to do that.
Thank you so much for joining me today to talk
me.
about your wonderful book, A Break in the Fog. I really appreciate it,
It's been a pleasure.
Molly.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. And this has been Talk of the Bay, and I've been your host here, George Cadman. Up next is Computer Man. Stay tuned. Thanks for listening, and thanks for supporting your local community radio station, KSQD 90.7 FM, and online at ksqd.org.